It's now September, despite the rather warm weather, and proving that just because it's September doesn't mean it's autumn quite yet. But you know what this means, right? Shirt dress September. Long story short, Serena, and if you don't know Serena, you probably should know Serena, said that shirtwaist dresses look good on everyone. Parts of the internet disagreed, particularly those who don't think that larger ladies can pull off such fantastic styles. Serena went to our mutual friend, Ashley Main, with the issue, and she decided to take the challenge, and roped the rest of our corner of sewing YouTube into it. So if you were planning to make a shirt dress, now's the time to do it. And post it up on Instagram so the rest of the world can see just how fabulous we all are. Seriously, if anyone knows how good a shirtwaist dress looks on plus-size people, it's plus-size people. At the time, Ashley showed me a Pinterest board with a bunch of plus-size shirtwaist patterns, many, of course, skewed to the retro side of things, just due to the general silhouette of the shirtwaist dress. Everything from the 1950s circle skirt dresses with camp collars to diner and service worker dresses based on what I think is 1930s or possibly 40s silhouette. There were a whole range of other options in between. Today's dress is one of the more modern versions, the Lenox Dress by Cashmerette. That's Lenox with one N, not two, and it always trips me up because I always associate the name Lenox with Annie Lennox, and she has the requisite amount of N's, not this low-calorie N nonsense. But I digress. I'm using this fantastic cotton bat and spiderweb print that the Husbeast and I found on sale at Fabricland last winter. I love how a lot of the retro and vintage ladies like to use their fun printed quilting cottons, but such fabric is generally extremely expensive here unless you can find a sale. I'm going with the gathered skirt on this dress. It's less finicky than pleats and gives the illusion of more volume than my measly 5 meters. I do have a bit of an ulterior motive, Calgary Frocktails. If I can get the dress made in time, I'll probably wear it. It's not a huge deal if I don't. I also have the fantastic purple linen Jennifer Lauren handmade Asteria dress that I made last September and don't get to wear very often, so I'm not hurting for choice. I just think that folks in my little corner of the YouTube sewing monkey sphere have elevated their personal Frocktails experience to a level similar to that of knitters and the New York State Sheep and Wool Festival, aka Rhinebeck, aka Knitter's Prom. Hi. That. Just as a knitter might make the last-minute decision to crunch the last week or two before Rhinebeck knitting a totally over-the-top sweater that probably should have been started months ago, I've been noting my fellow sewists cramming dress sewing into the last week or two before their local or preferred Frocktails. Looking at you there, Ms. Canada. I see you. The way I look at it, I get this done in time, I have a fantastic Frocktails dress, a fun shirtwaist September contribution, and spooky season has officially started. If I don't get this done by Saturday afternoon, it currently being Wednesday, then in the words of Jim Steinman as sung by the thankfully not immortal Meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Difficulty is going to be laying out and cutting everything out because wildfire smoke has finally hit us after a blissfully clear most of the summer, and I don't feel right putting the kittens in the sunroom. And that might explain some of the thumping and bumping that you might be hearing in the background, as at least one of them is currently running around the house like a cat possessed. We'll see if my opinion changes once the cream cat, who is currently right here, inevitably decides she needs to turn my fabric into her personal cocoon. So, let's get started. I've already taped and cut out my pattern pieces. Size 24 GH bust and size 32 hips. I picked up a French curve ruler so I could draw my lines a little bit nicer when grading between sizes. It's already made a huge difference. It may actually be worth the $24.50 I paid for it. If you'd like to help me afford notions and tools like this, I recommend booping the like button, making sure you're subscribed, and, apparently most importantly, commenting. I've been hearing comments are the key. Who knew? So maybe let me know your most useful tool, whether it's a fancy plastic ruler, a particular brand of knitting needles or crochet hooks, the fickle finger of familiar, can you hold this down please, I need to tie a bow, or a cat. You never know. Sometimes they make good pattern weights. If you really want to go over the top, I have a Patreon, and channel memberships are also available for them who don't want to visit a separate external site. I have a fantastic group of supporters whose funds Not gonna lie, have sometimes helped cover emergency costs or paid for sewing supplies, because as it stands right now, the approximately 1,300 views I sometimes attract on day 1, which is the day with the largest amount of views at once, nets maybe $25 if I'm lucky. Rolling in the big bucks here, folks. At least it paid for the ruler. If that's not up your alley, that's fine. As I said, apparently booping and commenting is where it's at. I was absolutely exhausted by the time I finished cutting everything out for what should be a very straightforward dress that has a lot of moving parts to tinker with. That's the thing I find with Cashmerette. The bigger scope projects really take it out of me. Cashmerette patterns are like a contact sport, and I don't know if that's a hallmark of Jenny Rushmore's design philosophy or if she's just finding new and unique ways to punish me for making so many patterns from Helen's closet. Thanks, Jenny! Cats got out in the sunroom at one point, and because one of them was trying to turn one of my skirt pattern pieces into a tunnel toy, I went with it. Otherwise, I'd have still been cutting out pattern pieces at 1 a.m. I noticed that the smoke was staying outside the sunroom, so that kept me from worrying too much about the wee beasties. I started somewhere around 3 p.m., had dinner break around 8:30 or so, and I think I finished up somewhere around 10:30 p.m. Just enough time to limp my worn-out self back up the stairs and watch one of the new episodes of Wednesday. I do notice that Netflix is starting to space out their binge-worthy content. Probably been getting bit in the arse by a lot of folks who renew their subscription, binge the show, and then cancel again until the next It show happens. I mean, maybe if they didn't jack up prices and insert advertisements, maybe didn't cancel things like Mindhunter before it can pick up its audience, they'd keep the subscriber longer. I mean, if you've already cut cable, and while you can get Netflix bundled with your cable package, I suspect there's a large demographic of cord cutters. What makes anyone think you won't cut a streaming service? Particularly the one that's shrinkflating its offerings by inserting ads or charging more. Also looking at you, Prime and Disney Plus. But that's just me speculating aloud. I knew there was a reason I kept most, if not all, of my physical media. Records, CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays. I think there's probably a box of cassettes around here somewhere. Did I mention that I worked in the cable industry for close to 20 years? You figure a few things out in that amount of time, even if you were about as far removed from the marketing department as one could probably get. Ah, well, there's still Stranger Things to look forward to, and the husbeast and I are working our way through Gravity Falls. I don't know why we didn't watch it when it first came out. I suspect it's probably because it aired on one of the Disney channels up here that were usually full of kid-centric stuff, and we were fully grown adults without kids to tell us what was cool. The last Disney animated series I bought into enough to really count was Gargoyles. Back in the day when the WB was airing cartoons aimed at apathetic Gen Xers stuck living in their parents' basements. Not much has changed, huh? Go Freakazoid and Pinky and the Brain. Anyhow, enough yapping about TV. I've got a dress to sew together, and from the looks of things, this simple shirt dress is going to be a bit of a challenge. Got 95% of the bodice done yesterday. All I really need to do is sew up the side seam. Easy peasy. I had an idea though before I had to pack up for the day, and I know, dangerous things, ideas. Contrast collar and cuffs. I have a wee bit of black linen left over from the March dress last year, and as the cuffs aren't turned under but sewn on, I thought it might be a nice break from the busyness that is the batten web pattern, which then had me considering the collar and button band. I'll just step you through my thinking on this. A contrast waistband would divide my body in two and possibly make me look a bit shorter than I am. It would definitely make me look wider because what it does is it chops me off at the waist. To keep my height, I definitely want to have a straight line going from my neck to my hem. I wondered if a contrast vertical stripe, the neck and button band, would thus elongate my body, and I didn't find a lot of pictures of dresses with contrast button bands, but I'm thinking it would probably also make me look wider by dividing the greater mass that is me into a right and left hemisphere, while simultaneously looking entirely too sporty, calling back to ye old vintage baseball shirts. So I'm going to go with the contrast sleeve band and collar. It's going to look twee as fuck with my bangs, cat's eye glasses, and chunky Mary Janes with tights. I need a freaking cardigan, don't I? Something to consider knitting this fall? Let me know in the comments. I'm just calling it now. Hot girl summer is officially over. Bring on chill twee autumn. Gonna need a cup of tea for that. If you don't hear the sound of my sewing machine, it's probably because I'm watching, or rather listening to, a Zooey Deschanel movie or something. Probably not. It'll probably be Footloose or Tremors again. I had to pick up buttons last night because I realized I don't have 13 buttons. Or if I do, I probably don't have 13 of the same buttons of the size recommended in the pattern. One of the drawbacks of being the person who picks up variety bags of buttons, cards of 2 or 3 buttons during clearance sales and thrift swaps, and working from my mother's old button collection. Sometimes you actually need to spend a penny so your buttons match. That said, I don't want to make 13 buttonholes. I don't want my shirt front to have the slightest chance of gaping or coming open in an entirely wrong place or time or area of the body. So I'm going to sew the button band closed to at least the waist, maybe higher. Depends on how much space I need to pull this dress on over my head. The buttons are going to be mostly, if not purely, decorative. And I can get away with this because I'm plus sized and my bust and my waist measurement aren't too far off. I don't think it technically qualifies as cheating. Work smarter, not harder, right? I'd been a little worried that the sleeves were going to be too short, but now that I've got the bodice on in whatever state this is, I'm a little bit more confident. I may make my sleeve band a little bit longer just to be sure. We'll see. Either way, it's giving me a bit more confidence in trusting the process. Pitter patter. I am mostly done with the bodice. I've got everything done down to the waistband, so that can be put aside while I work on the skirts, the button bands, collar, pockets, that sort of stuff. Really, it's probably going to go a lot faster now that I'm not working on all of these things. I did look ahead in the directions and did the sleeve band. This was one of the things that was done near the end, and I figured it was probably easier just to maneuver the bodice around rather than the bodice and skirts around, just to get that band on the sleeve. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a-okay. I'm pretty sure it will be. So now it's just skirts, putting in gathering stitches. Again, I'm not going to go directly with the instructions. I understand the instructions. I have read them over. I find that it's probably a little easier for me to put in the gathering stitches and then seam up the skirts and then gather to the bodice than it would be to gather to the bodice, then do all the seaming. And if something's a little bit off, having to try to ease back, I'd rather actually get the stitches in, get everything seamed together, and then make sure everything matches up. I am using huge pockets. I don't know whether I mentioned that. It's a mishmash of my usual huge enormous pocket and the way that Helen's Closet does things by cutting on the fold rather than having a seam at one end. So that should fit quite well into the waistband as well and give me a nice big place to put my car keys, because I'm pretty sure the purse I'm going to be taking to Frocktails is going to be a little too small for that. So always good to have a little bit more room, particularly in case I need to bring some anxiety knitting. I'm going to be around a bunch of people, but hopefully I can get all of this done in the next hour or two. So I will see you probably tomorrow. So here's the tea. I didn't finish up that night but kept going the next morning. I was sewing on the buttons right up until I had to leave for Frocktails. I knew I had a little wiggle room for time because Ashley Main was texting me right up until I got into the car to meet her, so I figure we left about the same time and arrived at the venue about the same time as well. I don't know what I was expecting, but there were a lot of people, and because sewists can be introverts and I didn't know the etiquette of filming at such an event, we kept our filming to the obvious photo area. Otherwise, I'm sure I would have had a lot of great B-roll. There were locals, solitary sewists, small groups, one group of ladies who were primarily knitters who all used the same dress pattern and came as a group, and adventurous folks from out of town. A couple of people even recognized Ashley and I from YouTube. It was a definite home team advantage, and the showrunner, for lack of a better term, who also runs the big local sewing group, spent a lot of time mentioning that the big local sewing group is full up and not accepting new members, which, if you're trying to find community, can be a bit frustrating. I heard some murmurings to that effect as the night wore on. I think I expected a marketplace, as I'm used to seeing such at conventions. Instead, the sponsors kept it to a small table with a free thread bowl or business cards or fabric samples to fondle. Probably best for my wallet. I did wind up talking for quite a while with the owner of one of the fabric stores, Rick Rack, and possibly Calgary's current largest yarn store, Stash Lounge. They're two different stores, though I think Stash Lounge started off as a mishmash of the two. We probably would have kept talking if stuff wasn't going on in the main room. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the nibbles available were somewhat meager, even for a $75 cocktail party. I'm not a big drinker, but even so I wasn't having alcohol on an empty stomach, or even one that had had a few cheese squares and a couple of crackers. So my solitary drink ticket is still in my little name tag packet. We decamped to Denny's afterwards because it was the only thing open and I could get something solid on my stomach to ward off a migraine. It was a good night though. I met lots of new folks, possibly some of the nicest strangers ever. Could it have been improved? Sure. If anything, I was just overwhelmed with the amount of people and noise. Maybe if we could get a second sewing group going, maybe in the north end of the city, that'll help foster some community, at least some familiarity. It's not like there aren't a whole bunch of people who hang out at the local fabric land. Or maybe I just need to find a way I can meet up with my internet friends and acquaintances, because there has to be a way we can con our Shirtwaist September co-conspirators to come to Calgary. You know who you are, secret Instagram cabal. The dress itself, I love it. Now that it's done. I don't know if it was me being in a hurry or misinterpreting the directions, but there were a couple of times I had to rip out and redo sizable chunks of work, and it set me back by a few hours. Not great on the whole, but especially nerve-wracking when you're sewing on any kind of deadline. To be fair, I wasn't banking on the dress being ready for Frocktails, but there's a bit of a line you cross where your brain realizes how close you are to finishing, if you can only work faster or not screw up. The quilting cotton is perfect for the dress. It has just the right amount of stiffness to make the construction really pop without being uncomfortable. The linen cuffs and collar are a wonderful solid statement instead of these parts getting lost in the graphic pattern. The pictures on Cashmerette's site look very modern to me, and it wasn't until I went to Instagram for pictures of other people's makes that I got a real idea of what the dress looked like in the wild and that it could have a retro flair. Someone at Frocktails mentioned that they thought Ashley and I had made different views of the same 1950s style dress, and were very surprised to find out mine isn't from the era or particularly inspired by it. It's just how it looks on me. That's your reminder that sometimes you have to take a risk and make something knowing it might not look like the dress in the promo pictures. It might look even better. I did get a lot of comments about getting ready for Halloween, and if you've been around here long enough, you already know that every day is Halloween. For me, it was a fantastic start to Shirtwaist September, and I really can't wait to see what you guys make. Just to let you know, I do try to keep a very close eye on the cats when they're in my sewing space, particularly when they're near the pointy things. It was as much a surprise to me as I'm sure it was to you when I saw Cream Cat get close to my, at the time, not in use, scissors during the cutting out process. I'm not even sure she was that close. It might have been a bit of an optical illusion, but I do try to keep an eye on them. But this is why I try to make sure they're not in my sewing space when I'm working on anything dangerous. I really do need to get a latch for the basement door, because even when the husbeast locks me in by putting an unpacked box in front of the door, they've been finding ways to move it and wriggle in. The sunroom isn't hospitable year-round for small short-haired moggies. A latch is probably the best solution. So all this to say, no cats were harmed in the making of this dress, unless you count the fact that they didn't like being left alone for an evening because the husbeast was also out of town, and they were very affectionate when I got home from Frocktails.